All right, just give everyone a minute to filter in there. You can see people coming in now. All right, I think we'll kick off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to AI in Finance, what top CFOs are doing in 2025. My name is Bonnie. I am an account executive here at Weel, and I'll be co-hosting today's session. So today's webinar is actually back by popular demand. We had an overwhelming response to this webinar series previously from finance leaders across Australia and New Zealand. Lots of requests for other team members wanting to join and for the recordings as well. So we wanted to bring it back and give others an opportunity to listen and continue the conversation on AI in finance. So just a bit of housekeeping to get us started. If you have any questions along the way, either for Damon or myself, please drop them in the Q&A function or the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom panel. Today is just going to be a quick 30-minute session. So we'll try and get through as many questions in the dedicated time, but if we're unable to get to any of your questions, of course, we can send the email responses afterwards. And finally, following the survey, you will be directed to, sorry, following the webinar, you will be directed to a survey. And this will be on a page after you leave the webinar. And we'd really appreciate your feedback. It just helps us to make sure we're sharing relevant content that is interesting and helpful to you. So if you have any comments that you'd like to share on this session, please do so in the survey. Alrighty, so now for some introductions. Again, my name is Bonnie. I'm an account executive at Weel. I've had the chance to speak to a lot of incredible finance leaders since joining Weel across Australia and New Zealand. It's been really interesting to hear how people are looking at spend and efficiency in their teams. I myself had my own small business. I've sold that now, but I also experienced the struggles when it came to spend management and just trying to find efficiencies to give me back time to focus on things that mattered, like reporting and growing the business. So I am really, really excited to be here today to have the opportunity to help other business owners and other finance leaders try and achieve the same levels of efficiency that I was able to find. I'm very excited to be joined today by Weel's CFO and COO, Damon. So, Damon, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and your role at Weel?
Yes, delighted to. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Damon Hauenstein, so CFO, COO at Weel. My background, I spent just over a decade working in investment banking and corporate advisory at Citi. So working with boards, CEOs, CFOs, other finance leaders to execute M&A transactions, capital raising transactions, and really, I guess, guide them through some of the most important decisions for their organizations. Joined Weel about 4 years ago to help take this business from, I guess, what was then a bit more of a startup into a scale-up territory, working with the founders to take this business to the next level. Now, one of the best things about both my prior role actually and this role is I get to work with finance leaders across many different industries, many different sizes, and help them unpick and unpack what is the most important things to them. And one of the really interesting things about the finance role is a lot of the challenges and problems are common across many organizations. And so there are great insights and learnings and experiences you can take from one company and one role and take it in to help others. So really seminars like this are a great way for me and us, Bonnie, to share what we've learned from others and impart some of that to a wider group. So thrilled to do that today. I think, maybe if I just make some general comments, we do see the CFO role changing really fast at the moment. I think we have seen a period where and maybe this is a timeless theme where there is an increasing focus on getting away from the repetitive compliance procedural roles and into much more strategic and customer facing roles in that CFO thing. We're seeing a lot more CEOs get picked from the CFO role, and I think that just speaks to the broad remit and importance that these roles have in organizations and how valuable they really are. But getting to that strategic place is hard. Like there is a lot of pressing demands for time for CFOs and finance leaders. So one of the topics we'll pick into today is how can you get away from some of that more repetitive procedural stuff and into the more strategic realm? What are the tips, strategies that help you automate and achieve that? So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, Damon. Before we dive into the discussion, I thought I would set a bit of context about the insights we'll be sharing today. So the session today is built around findings from Weel's AI and Finance report. So last year we conducted a survey with over 200 finance leaders across Australia and New Zealand. And then in June this year, we ran a follow-up pulse check. And we've pulled together the latest findings to share with you today. So some of the key insights that we're seeing in our data, and you can see a few points on the screen here, is that there's a clear gap between interest in AI and execution. So we found that 55% of companies are actively running limited AI pilots within selected teams, but only 15% have managed to integrate AI into their day-to-day operations. So it tells us that experimentation is happening, but full adoption is still a challenge. So why aren't teams scaling AI? The number one blocker we saw come through in the results was time and resources. Now, I don't think this is surprising to anyone. This was highlighted by over 55% of respondents, and it was followed closely by compliance and risk concern. Again, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, given the sensitive information that finance teams are usually working with. So I think, Damon, this is probably a good place to start our discussion for today. One of the key stats that stood out was that while 55% of finance teams are piloting AI, only 15% have integrated it into daily operations. Why do you think that gap exists?
So look, I don't think it's a big surprise that we see this, Bonnie. I think if you roll back to some of the earlier incarnations of language models, they were really bad at numbers. It was really the Achilles heel. Great at words, but weak with numbers. I think since then we've really seen that correct in the models, and they're now great at numerics today as well as words. But I think that legacy initial impression has stuck with a lot of people, and so I think a lot of finance teams have just stayed away from this a little bit. Now, I do think you picked up on a really good point, which is people struggle to find time for it. I would say generally what we see is probably a bit of a training and capability gap across finance teams. So I think a lot of people are experimenting, iterating, exploring different things, but it's pretty disparate across the teams. And generally, we're not seeing unified strategies in organizations. We're seeing like pockets of innovation, pockets of ideation, but it's not unified together in a coherent strategy. And I think, we'll talk about this today, but I think that is one of the real opportunities for finance leaders in organizations is to really take the mantle and drive that and try and realize some of those synergies across the different activities that are already going on today.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on that struggling to find time piece, but the other barrier to adoption that we saw was that compliance and risk concern being one of the top challenges. How can finance leaders make sure their teams are using AI safely and responsibly without creating new risks for the organization?
Yes. So look, it shouldn't surprise us that compliance and risk is on that list because this was a a survey of finance leaders, and this is something that rightly is on many finance leaders' minds. How can you safely discharge your responsibilities while still driving that innovation, Bonnie? So I think you know, unless you're a really big enterprise organization, you probably don't have the resources to go and police and put in very granular IT controls to stop data being extracted from the organization in these toolings. So I think a much more pragmatic, practical approach that can be taken is just getting the right training and cultural settings in place in organizations when you're not quite at that enterprise level. So what might that look like? Yeah, one is just training and awareness building. So making sure that people across the organization are aware that different data has different levels of sensitivity. You might think of a very simple three-tier model where you've got public data, you've got internal confidential data, and then you've got sensitive data, which might be, you might think of that as like personally identifiable information for individuals. Now, depending on which bucket it falls into, your risk tolerance and what you're happy for people to do with that data will differ. And obviously, you don't want that personally identifiable information being more widely disseminated. But I think just getting that awareness across the team, I think is really important so that when people are playing with models themselves, they have this in the back of their mind and it's there. And then I think the second bit is like cultural, and that is you're not going to be able in practice in a smaller, medium-sized business to police every interaction. So can you drive the right cultural setting so that individuals are making responsible decisions that you're comfortable with at a cultural level? And that enables you to start moving more quickly to experiment and try and realize the potential of some of these models. So that would be my overall tip. Don't try to police every little interaction because it's just so complex to get those set up unless you're a big organization. Just think about that general training and awareness and setting the right cultural tone across the organization so that individuals are making responsible choices themselves.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think one of the things that has come up quite a lot in this session that we've run previously is where are the realistic places to start with that? We don't have a whole heap of time to get into that today. So I think on the back of how you've answered it in the past, being a good place to start is actually looking at your current tech stack. If we looked at Weel as an example, what are some of the AI features that we've developed to improve accuracy and security?
Yeah. So yeah, maybe as context setting for this, I think yeah, many organizations, many finance leaders are under pressure to show progress and show results on AI. I think that is a theme playing out across the market. I would be surprised if anyone on this call wasn't getting these sort of questions from either their CEO or their board saying, what are we doing on AI? How do we make sure we and our team do not fall behind? So, how do you practically go about implementing and getting some runs on the board? A good place to start would be just experimenting with these tools, and we can access state of the art. The state of the art frontier models are actually available as the consumer facing apps that we know today, like OpenAI, ChatGPT, Anthropic, Claude, Google, Gemini, etc. They really are state of the art, and they're available to consumers, anyone to like pick up and use for a very small price relative to other subscriptions you might have. So that is one place. And then I think the other place, which I think is what you're alluding to here, Bonnie, is do you already have things in your finance tech stack today that have AI integrated in them that is also a way of showing that your organization is making progress on AI? And I think this one is like a really practical go-to. You would be hard pressed to find a software product or tool that doesn't have some level of AI functionality built in today, because that is where the world is headed. But I think people people are often slow to realize this or to um, see what is possible with these tools. So yeah, let's use Wheel as an example because I think we are a good a good example and probably illustrative of what many others are doing on this front. So a long-serving problem that we have looked to solve for individuals is when you make a transaction on one of your Wheel cards, a digital card, and the transaction comes through on the card statement, and someone goes and uploads a receipt. So you might have Square Gyms as the transaction record, and the user uploads a receipt that says Jim's Coffee Shop. Now, the text may not match. A human has always been capable of like looking at those two things and saying, okay, that probably means Square Payments, Jim's Coffee, we've got a match. Um, Historically, optical character recognition stuff hasn't really worked on this because the text fields aren't quite the same. But with the AI technology, it can do what a human has historically done here. It can like look at those and say, actually, that makes sense. That is more than likely to be a match. That looks good. But I think where this gets really interesting is anomaly detection, where you actually have the opposite scenario where the receipt uploaded just doesn't have any resemblance to what is on the card statement or the card record coming through. And I think that's where, we're using AI now to highlight and flag those to our users and getting fantastic feedback on it because it's taking people away from what used to be a very manual human task, freeing those people up so they can go and focus on more value additive strategic things.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great place to look is just in the tech stack that you've already got, but then obviously there are some really, really realistic starting points where you can get testing amongst a small group and roll out to the wider group. Um, so I think before we move to the next question, just a reminder to everyone to ask any questions that you've got. Pop them in the chat box or the Q&A because we will shortly be moving on to the Q&A session. Before we do though, I would just like to ask you, Damon, about the 90-day CFO guide. So just letting everyone on this call know, you will all be sent the 90-day CFO guide following this. But Damon, how can CFOs use the guide to get finance teams started with AI?
Yes. So this guide is something we've put together, I guess, similar to this session. It is like it captures some of the best learnings we've got from our discussions with finance leaders across New Zealand, across Australia. It is a PDF guide, so hopefully very easy, very practical for people to use and take away. Covers a range of things, so some simple diagnostic tools so that you can look at your organisation, see if there's ways that you could be optimizing it, some practical tips on how to roll out some AI functionality and strategies across your organization, has some AI prompts in there. I think it's very practical in its use case because it doesn't assume people have a big data team to go and do all of this work. It's really looking at some practical initial steps to drive it across the organization. So yeah, as you mentioned, Bonnie, we've had some really lovely feedback from people that have been working with it in their organisation. Yeah, love to make it available to this group, and it's obviously a free resource. And feedback we get from this group will help us shape the next one of these reports we do as well.
Awesome. I'm actually going to ask you one final question here, Damon. I wasn't going to, but I think it's important. To round things up, why do you think finance is so well positioned to lead AI adoption across an organization?
Well, look, this is a big change for the economy. I think for the market, for everyone. I think it's going to touch many parts of our lives. I think, within organisations, the finance leaders really are well positioned, in my belief, to actually drive this because it's like, who else? So, why finance leaders? Well, what does it need to drive AI in your organisation? You need someone that understands the data and analytics, and because the quality of the data going into the prompts and into the models generates the quality of what comes out. That is what finance leaders do today. It needs people that are familiar with governance and controls for the reasons we talked about earlier. Again, finance leaders are familiar with doing, for example, audit processes where there is a big focus on what are the controls in place to make sure the numbers are rigorous. Um, to take all those disparate activities in the organization, you need someone that can unify the group and like align stakeholders. Well, again, setting up budgets, doing forecasting, finance leaders have to understand every facet of the business to bring everyone together in a unified strategy. And then finally, storytelling. There is a lot of blue sky thinking around AI and a lot of imagination required around use cases because we are like pushing the boundaries of um, what is technically possible. So it does require people that can sell a vision and storytell. But again, finance leaders have done this for many years around the numbers. So you put those pieces together, data and analytics, that governance and controls piece, that stakeholder alignment, the ability to storytell and share a vision. They are all traits that finance leaders are really well equipped to do. And I'd probably encourage everyone here, look around the organization, who else might take the mantle. I think there's a really exciting opportunity for finance leaders. And, many organizations I talk to, it is the finance leaders that are driving this across their organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's finance leaders have got all of the tools and the knowledge to be able to lead this change. And I've seen it executed very successfully. So I think everyone on this call is very well positioned to kind of take that lead within their organizations. Okay, well, I think we're going to pivot here. We're going to go into the Q&A, and I've actually got a question that was asked by two separate people. So I'm going to ask you, what AI tools do you personally use day to day?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, maybe there's a simpler answer, which is I actually just, in many cases, I'm using the vanilla off the shelf frontier models. So ChatGPT, Claude, I think, using the models at their source, so to speak, I think in, forces you to like learn more about how they work, about what prompting and what context building actually yields the right results. So that is where I spend a lot of my time. As I mentioned earlier, just taking advantage of the AI embedded in existing things in our tech stack has been, really, really fruitful. And then, I've been experimenting with, but perhaps in a more limited sense around like end-to-end agentic workflows. But I think, particularly for the finance and accounting function, I would say this is still pretty nascent. So we've had really good success at Weel with like very discrete individual tasks. I think in the next 12 to 18 months, we'll start to see those pieces being able to strung together as like full end-to-end sequences. But I would say today, at least from our experience, we're still a couple of paces off that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Damon. I think that's probably all the time we have for questions for today. For the questions that didn't get answered, we will reach out to you via email after this to answer them. And if you didn't ask a question or you think of something following this, then please feel free to reach out to Damon or myself to answer that for you. Now, after this session, I mentioned before, but we're going to be sharing our 90-day AI guide with you all. But I wanted to just quickly call out that we have a whole heap of other resources available for finance leaders. We've got blog posts, we've got templates that you can use, and there's a calendar of other events as well. So if you want to be kept in the loop about upcoming resources and events, then please respond to the poll that's launching now. It should pop up for you all soon. I'll just give you a chance to respond. Awesome. Okay. While you're answering that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today and for contributing to the discussion on AI in finance. As I mentioned at the start of the session, this was backed by popular demand. So your engagement and feedback really does shape the content that will bring you next. If you found today's session valuable, then please fill out the survey that will pop up after you leave the webinar. It's going to help us create more content that's hopefully worth bringing back. And don't forget to keep an eye out for that email with that free CFO 90-day guide to AI. Thanks, everyone.